Snow fell in slow, heavy drifts outside the tall windows of the lighthouse, blanketing the rocky coastline of Ashford, Maine, in a quiet kind of stillness. The sea beyond was calm, dark, and endless, just like it was every year on this night. Christmas Eve. Inside, the warm glow from the fireplace cast long shadows against the walls. The room was perfectly arranged, elegant but untouched. Not a pillow out of place. Not a single decoration besides the minimalist wreath hung beside the door green with no ribbon. The tree in the corner stood tall and slender, trimmed with white lights and pale silver ornaments. Beautiful. Impeccable. Lifeless. Miles Whitmore stood near the window scotch in hand, dressed in a soft charcoal sweater and pressed slacks barefoot on the polished hardwood floors. The drink wasn't for comfort. It was a habit, a placeholder. He barely took a sip. He hadn't tasted it in years. The sea was quiet tonight. Not a boat in sight. The foghorn at the harbor had gone silent. All he could hear was the muffled whistle of wind curling around the lighthouse tower above, and the silence of being alone again. He exhaled slowly, watching the snow catch in the golden light outside. 52. Retired. Billionaire. Alone. That's how the headlines would read if anyone still cared to write them. Miles Whitmore, the tech prodigy who sold his startup at 35 for just under $1 billion, then disappeared from Silicon Valley 6 months later. No scandal. No dramatic farewell. Just vanished. 1 week he was on magazine covers, the next he was restoring an abandoned lighthouse on the far edge of a town no one remembered until summer tourists arrived. He hadn't done an interview in 7 years. He rarely answered his phone. He lived in the house he rebuilt with his own hands, paid for a state-of-the-art weather sensor to be installed on the roof, donated anonymously to the town's only library, and made monthly payments for the heating bills at the community center. No one knew. He never told. They called him the man in the lighthouse. Quiet, odd, untouchable. Miles turned from the window and set the glass down on the sideboard, barely noticing the way his fingers trembled. The clock on the mantel ticked evenly, too evenly. It was the only sound besides the occasional crackle from the fire. He crossed the room and stood at the edge of the living room rug, looking down at the tree. He hadn't bought any gifts. There was no one to give them to. The ache came and went now, not sharp like it once had been, just steady, like a weight he'd grown used to carrying. A quiet pressure in his chest, dull and familiar. He walked into the kitchen and opened the cabinet above the sink. 2 rows of identical ceramic mugs lined the shelf. He reached for one, then paused. His fingers moved past the stack to the back corner where a single cup sat ivory with a faded blue rim. A matching one had cracked years ago. He had kept this one. He stared at it for a moment, then closed the cabinet without taking anything. He wasn't hungry. He never was on this night. He walked back into the living room and stood still, unsure what he was even waiting for. A sound. A knock. A miracle. He laughed softly at himself. Then the laugh caught in his throat. He didn't believe in miracles anymore. He hadn't for a long time. The doorbell had never rung on Christmas Eve. Not in the 10 years he'd lived in Ashford, not once. No neighbors stopping by, no friends. The only cards he received came from the alumni office of MIT and his accountant in Boston. But still he always waited. He didn't know why. Maybe hope had a rhythm you couldn't silence. Maybe some part of him still listened for something, someone. He sat down on the edge of the sofa, elbows on knees, staring at the unlit candle on the coffee table. One of those scented ones people give as gifts when they don't know you very well. Cinnamon something. He'd left it unopened in a drawer for 2 years. Tonight, for some reason, he lit it. The flame flickered faintly. He watched it dance. It smelled like something distant, something not quite real. The clock ticked again. Just past 7 p.m., he leaned back, exhaling long and quiet. Then knock. A pause, then again. 3 soft, clear knocks. He froze. He blinked once, twice, listening. Silence. Was he imagining it? He stood slowly. His bare feet made no sound on the floor as he crossed to the door. He hesitated, hand hovering over the brass handle. No one knocks. Not here. Not now. He opened the door. The cold hit him first, bracing and fresh, cutting through the warmth of the house like truth. Then he saw them. A woman, maybe mid-30s, wearing a wool coat and a navy knit hat, stood on his porch, brushing snow from her sleeve. Her cheeks were flushed from the wind, and a few strands of dark blonde hair peeked out from under her hat. Beside her stood a little girl. She looked up at him with wide, curious eyes and a shy smile. She wore a red coat too big for her, and white mittens. In her small hands she held a box wrapped in brown parchment and tied with twine. "Hi," the woman said, voice warm but careful. "Sorry to bother you. We just moved into the cottage down the road, and my daughter insisted we bring cookies to the whole street." The girl stepped forward a half-inch. "They're cranberry oatmeal," she said. "Mom says those are fancy." Miles said nothing. He looked at the box. At the girl. At the woman who was starting to look a little unsure. "I know it's probably weird," she added, but she was determined. "I'm Sophie," the girl said. "She's Callie." His throat tightened before he understood why. Sophie. He hadn't heard that name in years. "I'm Miles," he managed. His voice sounded rusty, like it hadn't been used in too long. Sophie stepped forward and held up the box. "They taste better when you share them. I made them sparkle with sugar." Callie laughed softly. "She means sprinkled. We got a little carried away." Miles reached out and took the box gently. The paper was warm, still soft from the oven. There was silence again, but not hollow this time. It was full, waiting. "Would you like to come in?" he asked before he could stop himself. Callie blinked, then smiled. "Only if you're sure." He nodded. "It's warmer inside." Sophie bounced slightly on her toes. "Can we see your lighthouse?" Miles stepped aside. "You already are." They stepped in together. The door closed behind them, and for the first time in years, Miles noticed the sound of footsteps that weren't his. And something else. Laughter. Soft. Bright. Unexpected. It lingered in the air like cinnamon. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought matter to me either way. The smell of warm sugar and cinnamon lingered in the air long after the front door closed. Miles stood for a moment in the foyer, the cookie box still in his hands, as the sound of tiny boots clumsily thudded against the floor behind him. Sophie had already wandered toward the living room, her eyes wide, taking in the vaulted ceilings and tall windows. She moved with that fearless curiosity only a child could get away with, stopping to peer up at the lighthouse's spiral staircase through the glass partition. "Wow," she breathed. "It's like a castle, but quiet." Callie smiled softly as she unwrapped her scarf, looking around the entryway with restrained curiosity. "We didn't mean to interrupt anything," she said, glancing back at Miles. She gets excited about things, especially things that sparkle or feel mysterious. "Your house checks both boxes." "You didn't interrupt," Miles said. "Not at all. It was the truth. He had no plans. He never did. Especially not tonight." Callie gave a small nod and looked toward Sophie. "Not too far, please." "I'm just looking," Sophie called back, already peeking through a hallway arch that led to the kitchen. Miles gestured toward the living room. "Would you like something warm?" "Cocoa, maybe?" Callie blinked, surprised. Only if it's no trouble. It's already on the stove, he said. He hadn't remembered until that moment, but it was true. A habit from years past, he'd always put a pot of milk on to warm around this time, only to forget it and pour it out hours later. Tonight, for once, it would be used. Callie followed him into the kitchen. The space was minimalist, but not cold marble countertops, deep blue cabinets, brushed gold fixtures. Sophisticated, but nothing showy. On the island sat a fruit bowl, with exactly 3 apples perfectly arranged. Sophie climbed into one of the high stools and swung her legs, watching him. "I love your lights," she said. "Ours flicker sometimes, and Mom says it's just the wiring, but I think it's because the cottage is shy." Miles gave a small laugh, short-surprised, almost unsure how it had escaped him. "Shy yep?" Sophie said seriously. "Like how I used to hide behind Mom when people looked at me?" "I remember that phase," Callie said, taking a seat beside her. He turned to the stove, ladled the cocoa into 3 ceramic mugs, choosing 2 plain ones, and one with a cartoon whale he'd gotten as part of a charity box from the harbor. He hadn't thrown it out. He never knew why. Now he did. He set it in front of Sophie. She lit up. Whaley Callie raised a brow. "You named it that fast. She looks like a whaley." Miles smiled as he passed her the mug. "She does, doesn't she?" Callie took her cup, gently fingers, brushing his for half a second, just enough to make her look up. Their eyes met. Just long enough. "Thank you," she said, her voice softer now. "You're welcome." The silence after wasn't uncomfortable. It was new, uncertain, but not cold. Sophie sipped her cocoa, humming a made-up tune between sips, occasionally licking marshmallow from her upper lip. Callie glanced around. "This place is beautiful. Strange to think it used to be a working lighthouse." "It still is," Miles replied. "Technically, the light turns automatically now, but the structure is intact. You rebuilt it yourself." He nodded. "Took 2 years, and a lot of frustration." "But why here?" she asked. "If you don't mind me asking? This town's so quiet." "I wanted quiet." Something flickered across Callie's face. Understanding. Or maybe memory. She didn't press. Sophie interrupted the moment by pointing toward the fireplace. "Why is your tree so fancy but kinda sad?" Miles followed her gaze. "I don't know," he said. "Maybe it forgot how to celebrate." Callie smiled faintly, resting her chin on her hand. "Or maybe it's just waiting for the right people to remind it." The room stilled. Not tense, just fragile. Then came a knock. Light, rhythmic, but not on the front door. Mrs. Burke, Miles already knew before he opened it. No one else in Ashford would knock that confidently this late on Christmas Eve. There she stood in her long red coat, silver hair tucked into a hat, lined with fur, holding a Tupperware container like a peace offering. "Well, well," she said, peeking over his shoulder. "I see you've got company. Thought I smelled cocoa." Miles stepped aside politely. "Mrs. Burke." "What a surprise." "It's not a surprise," she said, brushing past him. "It's tradition. I've brought you cranberry walnut bread every year since you moved in, and you've ignored it every single time. I'm nothing if not consistent." Callie stood as Mrs. Burke entered the room. "Oh," Mrs. Burke said, eyeing her with interest. "You must be the young woman from the inn. Claire said you moved into the Gardner place." "That's us," Callie replied politely. "I'm Callie. This is my daughter Sophie." Sophie waved. "Hi, we brought cookies." "Well, aren't you just full of holiday spirit?" Mrs. Burke said, softening. "And brave knocking on this one's door." "Mom says cookies can open doors," Sophie said seriously. "Even the stuck ones." Miles nearly dropped his mug. Mrs. Burke caught his eye and arched a brow. "Out of the mouths of babes, Callie laughed gently. "We didn't expect to stay. Just delivering. And then, well, he was kind enough to invite us in." "Kind," Mrs. Burke said, overly loud. "Are we talking about the same man Miles gave her a look?" And she relented with a knowing grin. She turned to Sophie. "Did you decorate that tree yet? It looks like it needs a child's touch." Sophie lit up. "Can I?" Miles paused. He hadn't expected that. He hadn't invited it. But the thought of saying no suddenly felt wrong. "Sure," he said. "There are extra ornaments in the cabinet. Bottom shelf?" Sophie was already off the stool and skipping across the room before he finished. Mrs. Burke pulled out a chair. "Well, I guess I'll stay for a minute. Wouldn't want you two ladies thinking Miles is entirely antisocial. He's only about 80%. 85, Miles muttered. Callie smiled, sipping her cocoa. Mrs. Burke leaned in slightly and whispered, "You've got people in your house on Christmas Eve, Miles. If you don't take a moment to let that mean something, I'll personally string popcorn garland in your shower." He snorted. She grinned. "There it is." Almost a laugh. The fire crackled. Sophie hummed to herself as she hung a crooked star on a low branch. Callie watched her with the quiet, tired gaze of a mother who spent too many years doing everything alone. Miles saw it, and something in him shifted. He didn't say it aloud, but in that moment he felt it. The house wasn't quiet anymore, and maybe for the first time in years, he didn't want it to be. The announcement came the next morning just after breakfast service ended. It was printed on crisp white paper posted quietly behind the staff check-in desk. The kind of notice most employees skimmed without a second glance, except this one had a name on it. Effective immediately, Micah Dawson will be transitioning into a new role as Special Assistant to Vice President Caroline Whitmore. Please direct any related inquiries to Executive Administration. Micah read it once, then twice. The words didn't change, but the weight of them settled across his shoulders like a coat he hadn't asked to wear. He felt the ripple before he even turned around. Voices lowered behind coffee cups. Footsteps slowed when he passed. He was no longer just the guy who fixed the pipes and cleared out filters. He was someone to talk about. Monica approached him first, of course. She tapped his shoulder as he moved through the lower hallway. "Didn't think you'd actually do it," she said, not unkindly. Micah offered a dry smile. "Me either." "Well," she said, patting his arm, "watch your back. And keep your head on. This place likes to eat good people." Before he could ask what that meant, she was gone. At 10 a.m., Jennifer found him at the elevator and handed him a tablet and a neatly typed schedule. "Welcome to the other side," she said, smiling, though he noticed her eyes didn't quite match her tone. "Caroline's expecting you upstairs in the Whitmore suite. I assume you know where that is? I've fixed the faucet twice," Micah replied. Jennifer blinked, then nodded. "Right." The ride up to the executive floor was too smooth, too quiet. The kind of silence that made every second feel longer than it should. When the elevator doors opened, Caroline was standing there, waiting. She wore a navy blazer cream blouse, and that same calm expression that always looked a little too polished for real life. "Ready?" she asked. Micah nodded, adjusting the strap of the messenger bag he'd borrowed from Monica's son. She led him into the suite, and everything about it felt designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city walls lined with awards and family portraits, a sleek desk that looked like it cost more than his car. "You'll sit here," she said, pointing to the desk beside hers. "We'll start small email scheduling vendor coordination. Once you're settled, I'll loop you in on the expansion plans." Micah sat slowly, trying not to feel like a misplaced puzzle piece. She sat across from him, clasped her hands on the desk. "I know this is a shift, but I chose you because I trust you. That's not going to change." He nodded, unsure how to respond to that. Caroline paused, then added, "We keep everything professional while we're up here. No exceptions. If that's not comfortable?" "It is," Micah interrupted. "I get it." She studied him for a beat. "All right. Let's get started." For the next 2 hours, they worked in sync. Surprisingly so, she dictated emails. He typed. She paused during a call to Mouth Vendor Report tab 3. He already had it open. There was a rhythm to it, a quiet flow that didn't need explaining. It was only when they broke for lunch that things shifted. Carolyn stood, walked over to the window, and looked out across Savannah's sprawl of rooftops and trees. Micah followed, stopping a few feet away. "I thought this would feel more strange," she said, arms folded. "But it doesn't." "Because you're used to people adjusting to your world," he said before he could stop himself. She looked at him, a little surprised. Then smiled. "That's fair." Micah looked out the window too. "You ever wonder what it's like on the other side of this glass? All the way down there all the time?" He didn't believe her. Carolyn turned toward him, more serious now. "Micah, I need you to know something." He waited. "You're not here because of what happened in the lobby. You're not here because I feel guilty or because I'm chasing some childhood memory. You're here because I saw the way you work. Quiet, precise, no pretense." Micah looked at her. Even now, with everyone watching. She nodded. "Especially now." Before he could answer, the suite door opened. A tall man in his early 30s stepped in expensive suit-sculpted hair, the air of someone who never heard the word no. Bradley Whitmore. "Caroline," he said, not bothering to hide his surprise. His eyes flicked to Micah. "I didn't realize you were conducting interviews." Caroline's voice was cool. "I'm not." Bradley stepped closer. "So you've hired... who exactly?" Micah held his gaze but said nothing. Micah Dawson Caroline said plainly, "He's my assistant." Bradley turned to his sister, the smile dropping. "That's a joke, right?" "No." He looked back at Micah. "You're a janitor." Micah's shoulders tightened, but he didn't move. Caroline's voice cut through the tension. "He was maintenance. Now he's with me. That's the end of the conversation." Bradley laughed low and bitter. "Do you know what people are saying downstairs?" Caroline stepped forward. "I don't care." Bradley's eyes narrowed. "You should." Then he left. The silence that followed was sharp. Micah let out a breath. "Well, that went well." Caroline sighed. "Ignore him. I've been ignored by worse." She smiled faintly but didn't laugh. Micah looked at her. "You sure about all this?" Caroline didn't flinch. Every word. Later that night, as Micah walked Sophie home from Nadine's apartment, she skipped along the sidewalk humming. "Daddy," she asked, looking up. "Yeah, Peanut." "What do you do now?" Micah thought for a second, then smiled. "I work for a princess. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way." The air smelled like baked apples and cinnamon when Miles pushed open the door to the Sea Glass Inn's small cafe. He hadn't planned to walk there. He hadn't planned anything at all. But the cottage had felt too quiet again, and the lighthouse light clicking over the sea had started to feel more like a metronome for memories than a beacon. It was 2 days after Christmas, the kind of cold that bit the skin and made the sky feel sharp. Ashford had already tucked itself into post-holiday stillness. But the cafe was warm, lit with soft string lights, a small tree still glowing in the corner. Callie was behind the counter, hair pulled up in a loose bun apron powdered in flour, moving with practiced rhythm. Her eyes met his the moment the bell jingled. She smiled before she could stop herself. "You again," she said. Miles stepped in, brushing snow from his coat. You said I could come by. I did. She grabbed a towel and wiped her hands. But I didn't expect it. I don't usually show up where I'm not expected. Well, she said I'm glad you did. He hesitated, then sat on the stool at the far end of the counter. She slid a mug toward him without asking. Coffee, she offered. He nodded. Black. You don't strike me as a sugar kind of guy, not lately. She poured the coffee and leaned against the counter, watching him with quiet curiosity. So, she said, is this a social call, or are you just trying to make sure Sophie tapes more snowflakes to your walls? She left one in my coat pocket. Callie laughed softly. That sounds about right. Miles lifted the cup, but didn't drink. She's remarkable. She really is. There was a pause. It hung between them, not awkward, but full, like a thread stretching. I'm not used to this, he said finally. To what company? Conversation. Well, Callie said you're doing all right. Another silence. Then quietly, he added, You said something the other day, about people needing someone who sees them. Callie's face softened, but she said nothing. I haven't let myself be seen in a long time. She nodded. That's a hard habit to break. He looked at her then. Really looked. She wasn't glamorous. She wasn't pretending. She stood there in worn jeans and a coffee-stained apron with a smudge of flour on her cheek, and yet she carried herself like someone who'd built strength from broken pieces. She looked like a life that had kept going even when no one noticed. I don't know what this is, he said, voice low. Neither do I, she replied. But maybe it doesn't have to be anything yet. Maybe it's just two people who were tired of being ghosts. He smiled at that. Ghosts. That's how it felt, before we moved here. Like I was walking around but no one really saw me. Just a single mom doing her best, which apparently makes people very uncomfortable. I've never been a mom, Miles said dryly. She laughed. Well, it's exhausting, and terrifying, and beautiful, usually all in the same day. He sipped his coffee. Sounds familiar? Callie raised a brow. You don't have kids, do you? He hesitated, then shook his head. No. We were expecting... once. A long time ago, her expression shifted. I'm sorry. Miles looked down at the rim of his mug. She died before the baby was born. I never really knew what kind of father I would have been. But I think about it. Every day, Callie said. He nodded. The cafe door opened again, and the moment broke as Claire stepped inside, dusting off her coat. She paused when she saw them. Well, she said lightly. Didn't expect to see both of you here. Hi, Claire, Callie said, straightening. Hey, Claire replied, then looked at Miles. Nice to finally meet the man behind the lighthouse curtain. Miles gave a polite smile. Likewise. Claire's gaze lingered. Not hostile, just assessing. Then she turned back to Callie. I've got deliveries coming in tomorrow morning. Can you cover the early shift? Of course, Callie said quickly. Sophie can come with me if school's still closed. Claire nodded. I'll bring extra cocoa. She left a moment later, the bell jingling behind her. Callie exhaled and rubbed her arms. She means well. She doesn't trust me. She doesn't trust anyone who doesn't come with a background check and 3 references, smart Miles said. She's right to be cautious. Callie leaned forward. What are you trying to say, Miles? He met her eyes. That I haven't always been the version of myself people would root for. Well, she said, folding her arms. I haven't always been the version of myself I'd want my daughter to copy. He tilted his head. Do you regret it? She paused. Parts of it. But not Sophie. Not any part of her. She's lucky to have you. Callie looked at him for a long moment, and for the first time something shifted in her expression, Less guarded, more open. "Come back for dinner," she said. Miles blinked. "Dinner tomorrow. If you're not busy being mysterious," he considered it. "I haven't been to dinner at someone else's home in years." "Good," she said. "Time to break the streak." He almost smiled. "Should I bring anything?" Callie grinned. "Bring the snowflake. I'll tell Sophie she converted another one." That night, Miles stood in his living room staring at the small square of paper Sophie had taped to the inside of his coat pocket. A child's drawing of 3 stick figures, a tall one, a shorter one, and a small one in a red dress, stood under a lopsided star. The lighthouse was in the background, and at the bottom she'd written in crayon, "This is us being not lonely." He traced the edges of the paper with his thumb, then slowly walked over to the mantel and tucked it next to the candle. The flame flickered, casting light over it. He didn't move for a while, just stood there, watching it glow. Snow crunched under Miles's boots as he stepped off the sidewalk onto the front path of the little blue cottage with the crooked red door. The porch light flickered a soft amber glow against the dusk, and from the front window he could see shadows moving behind gauzy curtains. Inside, warmth, movement, life. He stood there for a moment, holding the bottle of wine he wasn't sure was too formal or not enough, debating whether he should have brought flowers or dessert, or nothing at all. It had been years since he'd done this, stepped into someone else's space, with no business reason, no meeting agenda, no escape route already planned in his head. He exhaled, shook off the nerves, and knocked. 3 short, solid taps. The door opened almost immediately. Callie stood there in jeans and a soft green sweater sleeves pushed up to her elbows, cheeks slightly flushed. Her hair was down this time, loose waves framing her face. The smell of something warm, garlic, rosemary, maybe chicken, floated out with her. "You came?" she said, surprised but not displeased. "I said I would." She smiled, stepping aside. "Come in. Watch out for the snow boots. Sophie lines them up like it's a museum exhibit." He stepped inside, careful not to knock over the row of tiny boots along the wall. The house was small, but charming. Lived in. A stack of books on the coffee table, a mismatched rug in the living room, and a garland of paper stars strung across the doorway. A real pine tree stood in the corner, too small for the room, its branches heavy with handmade ornaments and tinsel. One of Sophie's snowflakes hung dead center. Callie glanced at the bottle in his hand. "That's actually perfect." "Thank you." Miles looked around. "Do I need to take off my shoes? Only if you want to avoid judgment from a 6-year-old." He stepped out of them and followed her into the kitchen. Sophie sat at the table, coloring intently, with her tongue peeking out between her teeth. She looked up when he entered. "Mr. Miles." He gave a small wave. "Evening, Sophie. You're on time," she said seriously. "We're still in Phase 1. Miles raised a brow. Phase 1. Drawing, Callie clarified, pouring 2 glasses of wine. "She's making a dinner menu even though everything's already cooked." "It's important to plan," Sophie said, without looking up. He sat down across from her and leaned over to peek at the paper. It read, "Tonight's dinner 1. Chicken with mom stuff. 2. Green trees, not the mushy kind. 3. Fancy bread. 4. Cookie dessert. If we're good?" Miles pointed. "What qualifies as mom stuff?" Sophie shrugged. "Magic, you'll see." Callie set the wine down in front of him. "She makes it up as she goes, but it always works." He sipped and let the warmth settle in. The cottage was filled with those quiet, soft sounds he'd forgotten to notice: water bubbling in a pot, a faint hum from the fridge, Sophie's pencil scratching against the paper. And then came a sound that stiffened the air. A knock? Not a polite one. not soft. Callie froze. Just for a moment. Then wiped her hands on a dish towel and walked to the door. Miles stood instinctively but stayed back, watching her posture shift. She opened the door halfway. Outside stood a man in a wool coat and slick shoes, tall, clean-shaven, charming smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Callie," he said. She didn't speak. Sophie looked up, puzzled. "Who's that?" she whispered. Callie cleared her throat. "Miles, this is Daniel." The name landed like a dropped glass, not loud but sharp. Daniel turned to him, extended a hand. "You must be the famous lighthouse man. I've heard things." Miles didn't move. Callie stepped between them slightly. "Daniel, why are you here? I was in the area," Daniel said, as if that explained anything. "Thought maybe I could say hello. Meet my daughter." Sophie's brow furrowed. "You're not Mr. Miles." "No," Daniel said, eyes softening as he crouched slightly. I'm someone else. I'm your dad." Callie tensed. Miles stepped forward now, not hostile, just present. Daniel looked up. "Relax. I'm not here to cause trouble. You don't get to show up uninvited and say that like it means something." Callie said, her voice tight but low. Sophie stood up from her chair. "Mom?" Callie turned. "It's okay, baby. Why don't you go color in your room for a minute? I want to stay," Sophie said. Callie kneeled beside her. "Please. I just need a grown-up moment." Sophie hesitated, then walked down the hallway, dragging her coloring book behind her. Daniel stood again, adjusting his sleeves. "I've changed, Callie. I've got a stable job. I'm doing well. I've had time to think." 5 years of time, she said quietly. He swallowed. "I want to be part of her life. You left before she was born. I wasn't ready. That's not an excuse." "I'm not making excuses," he said. "I'm trying to make amends." Miles spoke now, calmly. "Maybe you should make them through the proper channels." Daniel glanced at him, then back to Callie. "So this is the new arrangement, you and him playing house. That's none of your business," Callie said. He let out a soft chuckle. "You're right, it's not. Yet." Miles took a step forward, not threatening but firm. "I think you've said enough for tonight." Daniel stared for a long beat, then smiled again. "This isn't over," he said, not cruelly, just confidently. Then he walked out into the snow boots, crunching against the frozen path. Callie closed the door with more care than expected. She stood there, hand still on the handle. Miles waited. "I didn't know he was coming," she said quietly. "You don't have to explain." "Yes, I do." She turned toward him. "Because you showed up tonight. You walked through that door without knowing anything about my mess, and now it's at your feet. It's not your fault." She laughed once, sharp and small. "Still feels like it is." Sophie peeked around the corner, her eyes uncertain. Callie opened her arms. "Come here." The little girl ran to her, clung tightly. "It's okay," Callie whispered. "You're safe. Nothing's changing." Miles watched them, his throat tight. She looked at him over Sophie's shoulder. "You don't have to stay," she said. "If this is too much, I'll understand." He stepped forward, placed the menu sheet drawn back on the table carefully, then looked her in the eyes. "I came for dinner," he said, "and I don't leave when it gets complicated." Callie blinked. Her grip on Sophie eased just slightly. In that moment, something fragile passed between them, unspoken but stronger than words. A promise not in grand gestures, but in presence. And sometimes presence was everything. The following morning, frost coated every window of the lighthouse in delicate spirals. Miles sat at the kitchen table, fingers curled around a mug of coffee that had gone cold. He hadn't slept much. Not because of anything specific, just a weight. One he couldn't name, One he hadn't felt until last night. He kept replaying it. The knock, the voice, the way Callie had braced herself before she even turned the handle. Daniel. That name stuck. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The paper snowflake Sophie had taped there fluttered slightly in the draft from the heater. She'd called this house lonely. Then she filled it just by being herself. Now something cold had come with the wind again, and it had nothing to do with the weather. Miles rubbed his face with both hands. He didn't want to admit it, but the idea of Daniel returning wasn't just about Callie. It shook something deeper. A life he'd imagined once. A family that never arrived. And the sudden unwelcome thought that someone else could take it all away before it ever had a chance to become real. The kettle clicked behind him. He didn't move. Callie stared at the envelope in her lap. It had come with no return address, just a simple stamp, and her name in careful handwriting she hadn't seen since before Sophie was born. Inside a letter. No threats, no apologies either. Just lines that read like a list of intentions. I'd like to be part of her life. She deserves to know who I am. I've contacted an attorney. We'll keep it civil. I hope you'll cooperate. She crumpled the paper before she realized what she was doing. Across the room, Sophie sat cross-legged on the rug-building towers out of wooden blocks and humming something she'd made up. Her hair was still mussed from sleep, her cheeks pink with leftover dreams. Callie pressed the heel of her palm to her chest. Her heart was beating too fast. Claire knocked once on the open door holding a paper bag and coffee cup. I brought scones. Callie tried to smile. You didn't have to. Claire stepped inside and sat down without asking. You're not at work. You always show up. So, I figured something's wrong. Callie stared at the cup. Daniel showed up last night. Claire stilled. Here, at your house? Callie nodded. He met Sophie, introduced himself, like he was entitled to it. Claire's jaw tightened. I knew something was off. I saw him at the diner 2 days ago. Thought he looked familiar. I should have warned you. You couldn't have known. Claire reached over and put the bag of scones on the table. So what now I don't know? Callie's voice cracked. I've done everything right. I've worked. I've raised her on my own. I've never asked for anything. And now he shows up and acts like he gets a say. Claire was quiet for a beat. And Miles? He stayed. Claire lifted her brows. Really? Yeah. He stayed, helped me calm Sophie down, helped me stay upright. Claire leaned back. I'll be honest, Cal. I don't know much about the guy. And I've been protective because, well, you've been through enough. I know, but if he's showing up when it counts? Claire shook her head. That's rare. Callie let the silence fill the space. Then she whispered, I don't know if I can do this alone again. You won't have to, Claire said. Not this time. It was almost dark when Miles heard the footsteps on the path. He opened the door before she knocked. Callie stood there in a long coat scarf tucked up to her chin, eyes red like she hadn't stopped thinking since sunrise. I'm sorry for just showing up, she said. You're always welcome, he replied. She stepped inside, rubbing her hands together. I needed air, and you. He didn't speak, just waited. Callie looked around the room like she was memorizing it, like it might disappear if she blinked. He sent a letter, she said. Daniel. Said he wants to pursue legal visitation, that he's hired a lawyer. Miles's posture didn't change, but his eyes did. I haven't told Sophie, she added quickly. Not yet. She's too young to carry that kind of confusion. He moved closer. Do you have someone a lawyer? I don't have the money to fight him, she said, voice breaking. I'm barely covering rent and school supplies. Miles's expression didn't shift, but something behind his chest ached. She looked at him then. I'm not asking for anything. Please don't think that. I needed to tell someone. Someone who wouldn't treat me like a mistake waiting to happen. He reached for the ceramic box on the side table, the one Sophie had decorated with stickers the last time she visited, and opened it. Inside was a folded note. He took it out, held it in both hands, then tucked it away again. You're not a mistake, he said softly. You're someone who's been surviving for so long, you forgot you were allowed to ask for help. Callie's breath caught. He took another step toward her. I can help, he said. If you'll let me. Her eyes filled and she turned away. If I let you help, it becomes real. And if it becomes real, I'm terrified of what happens if it falls apart. Miles didn't answer immediately. Then quietly, everything real is fragile. But that doesn't mean we don't hold it. She looked back at him, tears slipping down. I'm not your responsibility, she whispered. No, he said. But you matter to me. That's different. They stood there for a long moment, not moving, not rushing. Finally, she stepped forward and leaned against him. Not a kiss, not a collapse, just contact, her head against his shoulder, his arms circling gently around her back. It wasn't an answer, but it was enough for now. Snow had returned to Ashford overnight, blanketing everything in a fresh hush. The town moved slower, in January quieter than usual. The tree lots were empty now, lights packed away in cardboard boxes, and Christmas had faded into memory, except in the lighthouse, where the paper snowflake still clung stubbornly to the kitchen ceiling, and a red mitten Sophie had dropped weeks ago still rested on the banister. Miles stood at the sink, rinsing 2 coffee mugs, steam curling above the basin. He glanced at the clock. 9:13 a.m. He hadn't heard from Callie yet, not that he expected a call, or a text. They hadn't defined anything. But after last night, after her head had rested against his shoulder, and her voice had trembled with everything she was afraid to say, he felt like something had shifted. Not forward exactly, but inward. He set the mugs upside down to dry, and reached for his phone thumb hovering over her contact. He didn't press it. He just stared for a second too long. Then came the knock, not at the door on the back window. Sharp, familiar. Only one person knocked like that. He turned toward the sound and saw him. Jonas. His younger brother stood in the snow dressed in a navy peacoat scarf, tucked like a magazine ad, wearing a grin that didn't match his eyes. Miles opened the door slowly. You're early. I'm frozen, Jonas replied, stepping inside. Let's call it even. Miles closed the door behind him. The warmth of the lighthouse didn't melt anything between them. It's been 4 years, Jonas said, looking around. Still looks like a furniture catalog in here. Miles shrugged. Clean is easier than comfortable. You always did hate clutter. There was a long pause. Coffee, Miles asked. I won't say no. They moved into the kitchen. Jonas pulled off his gloves, scanned the room. I passed the cottage on the way in. You know the one with the red door? Miles nodded. Pretty woman lives there, kid too. What's her name again? Claire mentioned her last time I was in town. Miles didn't answer. Jonas raised a brow. Ah, that explains the warmth in this place. Smells like there's been actual life here. I don't see how that's your business. You're my brother. You're allowed to have your life, sure. But disappearing for a decade doesn't erase history. Miles handed him a mug. Jonas took it but didn't drink. You still think I should have done something different. I think you made your choice. You moved on, quickly. I grieved differently. You remarried within the year, Jonas. She was gone, Miles. What did you want me to do, sit in ashes? Miles turned away. You didn't just move on. You moved up, and erased everything that reminded you of her. Jonas stood quiet, his voice tightening. You think that was easy for me? I don't know what was easy for you, Miles said. I wasn't there. The silence stretched between them, cold, sharp-edged. Jonas set the mug down. You know what, I think you got stuck. And you liked it. You liked the control. No one to disappoint. No one to lose. Miles said nothing. I just hope, Jonas added, if you finally let someone in again, you don't shut her out the moment she complicates things. Miles looked up. What do you mean? Jonas leaned on the counter. I mean, you've always been good at starting things. But staying, that's where you fall apart. The words landed like small thuds, not cruel, just true enough to sting. Before either of them could speak again, Miles's phone buzzed on the counter. Callie. One new message. He opened it. Can you meet me at the inn later? There's something I need to talk to you about. And Sophie's asking for you. His chest tightened. Jonas was watching. You don't have to prove anything to me, but if you care about her about them, don't ghost your way through this like you did with everything else. Miles picked up his coat. I won't. Jonas nodded once. Good. Because some chances don't knock twice. The wind off the water was colder than usual when Miles stepped into the Sea Glass Inn cafe. Callie was already there, hair pulled into a low bun, sleeves rolled up to her elbows, hands wrapped around a cup of tea. She smiled when she saw him, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. He sat across from her. Is Sophie okay? She's fine. At my neighbor's, baking something with way too much food coloring. He waited. Callie tapped the rim of her cup. Daniel filed. Officially, custody claim, visitation rights. Miles exhaled slowly. I'm so sorry. He's doing it by the book, she added, which is worse somehow. It makes him look clean, responsible. He found a lawyer in Portland, has a new address, a job. Miles's jaw clenched. He never wanted her, Callie whispered. Never called. Never wrote. But now that she's bright and sweet and good, now he wants credit. He watched her, the hurt behind her composure unraveling thread by thread. I'm scared, she said, because I don't have the resources to fight him. I don't have the energy, and I can't let Sophie get pulled into something she doesn't understand. You won't do it alone. She met his gaze. I mean it, Miles said. I know I haven't said a lot. But what's between us? I'm here for it. For you. For her. She blinked, fast eyes shining. I've already reached out to someone, he continued. A friend. Family law. He's good. Quiet. Private. You did that without me asking. Yes. She was silent. Then softly. Why? Miles reached across the table, fingers brushing hers. Because you matter. And because Sophie deserves someone who won't leave when things get hard. She didn't speak. She just turned her hand over and laced her fingers with his. Not a declaration, not a promise, but a beginning. Sophie's laughter echoed from the kitchen, sweet and unfiltered, as she attempted to balance a marshmallow on the tip of her nose. Callie leaned against the counter, watching with a smile she couldn't quite shake. Miles was crouched beside Sophie, coaching her with exaggerated seriousness. You've got to tilt your head just enough, he said, demonstrating. There's a science to it. Nope, Sophie squealed, as the marshmallow slid off again. Your nose is too long. That's cheating, Callie laughed, folding her arms across her chest. He's not wrong. It's a highly unfair advantage. Miles shot her a mock glare. This is targeted discrimination against distinguished noses. Sophie picked up the marshmallow and shoved it into her mouth instead. Solved it, she mumbled. Callie watched the scene like it was something she was afraid to blink away. She hadn't seen Sophie this light in weeks. Not since the letter came. Not since the shadows returned. This was different. This was peace. But peace Callie had learned was delicate. Later, after Sophie had gone to bed tucked under layers of quilt with her favorite stuffed polar bear and a small flashlight just in case Callie and Miles moved to the small couch in the living room. The tree lights were still up, casting soft glows of red and gold across the walls. A quiet settled over them that didn't feel awkward. Just warm. "She likes you," Callie said, sipping tea. "She's careful with who she opens up to. But she likes you." Miles looked down at his hands. "I like her too. I've forgotten how natural kids can be, how honest. They don't know how to pretend yet." He nodded. "I used to wonder what kind of dad I would have been, whether I would have been any good at it." Callie tilted her head. "And now," he exhaled slowly. "Now I just wonder what kind of man I am when someone small is watching." That hung in the air. She shifted slightly, her shoulder brushing his. "You're gentle with her." "She notices." Miles hesitated, then asked, "Do you think I'm getting too close?" Callie blinked. "Why would you ask that? Because you're in the middle of a storm, and I don't want to be another gust that knocks you sideways." Her eyes searched his face. "You're not a storm, Miles," she said. "You're the calm in it." His jaw tightened. "That's a lot to live up to." Maybe, she said quietly. "But it's already who you are to her." He looked at her, then not guarded, not distant, soft, willing. But before he could speak again, her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She reached for it, frowning at the screen. Her heart dropped. "Daniel," she muttered. Miles tensed beside her. "Do you want to take it?" "No," she said quickly, then paused. "Yes, I should." She stepped into the hallway. Miles stared at the lights on the tree the way they flickered in time, with the old heater humming in the walls. When Callie returned 5 minutes later, her expression was unreadable. "What did he say?" Miles asked gently. She lowered herself onto the couch with a sigh. "He wants to meet, face to face. No lawyers, just talk." Miles frowned. "Alone. He says he wants to explain himself. Says he's not trying to fight, just wants clarity. Do you believe him?" "I don't know," she said. "I don't trust him. But part of me feels like, if I don't hear him out, it'll only get worse." Miles didn't answer right away. Then finally said, "Then I'm going with you." She turned, startled. "You don't have to do that, I know. But I'm still going. I can handle myself." "I don't doubt that for a second," he said. "But you don't have to prove it to me. And you don't have to be alone." Callie let the words sink in. Slowly, they softened something in her. "Okay," she said. "If you're sure." "I'm sure." There was another pause, but this one was different. Settled. "I keep thinking," she said, voice quieter now, "about how close I came to never knowing you. If Sophie hadn't dragged us out that night to deliver cookies, if I'd listened to that voice in my head that told me to just stay home." "I think about that too," he said. She turned toward him. "Do you ever wonder if certain people are meant to find each other, no matter how much time or distance or pain gets in the way?" Miles smiled faintly. "I do now." Her eyes didn't leave his, and when he reached for her hand, she didn't hesitate. She just held it. Tight, like she'd been waiting to all along. The coffee shop Daniel had chosen for the meeting was far enough outside Ashford to feel neutral, like no one could claim it. Not Callie, not Miles, not even Daniel himself. It sat on the edge of a strip mall off Route 1, the kind of place with mismatched chairs, a chalkboard menu, and the faint scent of burnt espresso lingering in the air. Callie arrived first. Her hands were steady, but her stomach churned as she walked through the door. Miles was already inside, sitting at a table near the window, a half-full cup in front of him. He stood when he saw her, his eyes scanning her face like he could sense the storm inside her without needing to ask. "You okay?" he said gently. She nodded, though it wasn't entirely true. "He's not here yet." Miles offered a small, reassuring smile. "We don't have to stay long. Just enough to get what you need." She sat beside him, not across. Close, but not clinging. She didn't want to give Daniel any satisfaction by appearing weak, or any illusion that this was still some kind of triangle. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. And then Daniel walked in. He wore the same polished look he had the night he appeared at her door. Slacks, a gray wool coat, a scarf she suspected had been chosen more for impression than warmth. His eyes scanned the room quickly, then landed on them. He gave a small smile, polite but rehearsed. "Callie," he said, approaching. "Thanks for meeting." She nodded once. "Daniel." He looked at Miles next. "I didn't expect a +1. Miles didn't move. "I'm here for support, that's all." Daniel raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. He pulled out the chair across from them and sat down, folding his hands like he was leading a presentation. "I appreciate you giving me the chance to speak," he began. "I know this isn't easy." Callie stayed quiet. "I want to be part of Sophie's life," he continued. "I know I've said that already, but I mean it. I've changed. I've worked on myself, and I'm ready." Callie's voice, when it came, was calm but sharp. "What does that even mean, Daniel? Worked on yourself? You ghosted me. Disappeared. You knew I was pregnant and you left anyway." I panicked. I was 25, working nights, alone, and you panicked. "I wasn't ready then," he said, voice tight. "But I am now. You don't just get to walk back in because it's convenient." He leaned forward. "I'm not trying to take her from you, Callie, but you filed for legal visitation. To ensure I have rights," he said, "not to erase you." She swallowed. Her fingers gripped the edge of the table. Miles spoke now, carefully measured. "So what are you hoping to gain from this meeting?" Daniel turned to him. "Understanding? Cooperation? I don't want to fight, but I will if I have to." Callie exhaled slowly, pushing her tea aside. "You left her. You've never even called. She doesn't know your voice, your face, anything. And now you think you can just insert yourself and she'll love you. She deserves to know where she comes from. She knows who loves her. That's what matters." Daniel's expression tightened. "I didn't come here to be shamed." "No," Callie said quietly. "You came to be forgiven, without ever earning it." He looked away, jaw clenched. "I don't hate you," she said softer now. "But I don't trust you. And you don't just get to reclaim a role because biology says you can." Daniel stood abruptly. "Then I guess we'll let the courts decide." He left the coffee untouched. The bell over the door jingled as he walked out. Callie sat still for a moment, the silence wrapping around her like a blanket that suddenly felt too heavy. Miles reached over and gently placed his hand over hers. "You did exactly what you needed to do." Her throat tightened. "It doesn't feel like enough." It was more than enough. She looked down at their hands. "He's going to try to twist everything. Make it sound like I kept Sophie from him. Then we make sure the truth is louder." She nodded. "We'll need statements, documents, everything I've got from her birth, and I'll need to prepare her. Carefully." "I'll help," he said, "in whatever way you need." She looked at him, now really looked. "Why Miles?" He paused. "Because I've been alone for a long time, and I didn't realize how much I wanted something real until you two walked into my life. Her eyes welled, but she didn't blink them away. "I don't know what the next few months will look like," she whispered. "Neither do I," he replied. "But we'll walk through them together." She leaned against him, letting herself be held, not like someone falling apart, but like someone remembering she didn't have to hold everything alone. Outside, snow had started again, light swirling silent. Inside, the war hadn't ended, but a line had been drawn. And love, even in its quietest form, had chosen a side. The next week moved like a slow tide, nothing dramatic, no crashing waves, but underneath the calm, everything shifted. Callie sat at the small desk in the corner of her bedroom, the kind that faced the window and caught the softest light in the afternoons. Papers were spread out in front of her: medical records, school enrollment forms, receipts she'd saved without knowing why. Each document was a thread in the tapestry of Sophie's life, proof of every small and steady step she'd taken alone. Until now. Sophie was in the living room, humming along to a cartoon she wasn't really watching while Miles made dinner. He moved like he belonged in the kitchen sleeves rolled towel over his shoulder, asking now and then if she wanted carrots shaped like stars or hearts. "I'm leaning star-shaped," he called out. "Sophie seems like a star girl." "I'm both," she shouted back. Callie smiled faintly. She was still getting used to that, hearing his voice inside her home part of the rhythm. But nothing about this week had felt normal. Not after Daniel's meeting. Not after receiving the official court notice with a stamped hearing date. March 2nd, just 6 weeks away. She picked up a photo from the edge of the desk. Sophie, age 4, in overalls and one yellow rain boot. Mud smeared on her cheek, holding a dandelion like it was a rare jewel. Callie pressed the photo to her chest for a moment, eyes closed. Then a knock came at the door. Not the front door, her bedroom. She looked up to see Sophie peeking in, holding a crayon-streaked notebook. "Can I show you something?" Callie nodded, motioning her in. "Of course." Sophie climbed up beside her and opened the notebook. On the first page was a drawing: 3 stick figures holding hands under a house with a crooked roof. Callie pointed. "That's you in the middle, yep. And you on the left. And Mr. Miles on the right." She blinked. "Oh," Sophie beamed. "Because he's here a lot, and I like when he reads the bunny voices." Callie smiled softly, then turned the page. The next was titled, "Things I Want." It was written in big, wobbly letters. 1, cookies before dinner sometimes. 2, a dog. 3, no court stuff. 4, for Miles to stay. Callie's throat tightened. Sophie added more quietly. "I heard you talking. You think I didn't, but I did." Callie set down the notebook. "Sweetheart, you don't have to worry about the court. I'm not scared," Sophie said. "I just want everything to stay like it is." Callie ran a hand through her daughter's curls. "So do I." Sophie leaned against her. "Then make it." She said it like magic, like her mom could just fix the world with a promise. Callie kissed the top of her head. "I'm trying, baby. I really am." That night, after Sophie fell asleep, curled up under a new blanket Miles had bought her, navy blue with constellations stitched into the fabric, Callie and Miles sat outside on the porch. The air was sharp, but still. Breath showed in front of them in little puffs of white. Miles handed her a mug. Not tea this time. Hot cider. "I haven't said it yet," she said. "But thank you." "For what? For being here. For stepping in when you didn't have to. For not getting overwhelmed and running." He stared out toward the snowy yard. "There was a time I would have." Callie looked at him. "What changed?" He thought for a long moment. "I stopped being afraid of things going wrong, and started being afraid of missing something good." She set her mug down. "Do you mean that?" He turned to her. Every word. There was a pause, but not the heavy kind. Then she asked quietly, What do we do if Daniel wins? Miles didn't flinch. We do what's right for Sophie. Every day, no matter what a court decides. But what if he gets partial custody? What if she has to leave here? What if he confuses her or tries to rewrite everything she knows? We'll show her what's real, he said. Kids see more than we give them credit for. She knows who's steady. She knows love that doesn't shift. Callie's eyes burned. I just don't want to break her. You won't. He reached for her hand, laced their fingers again. You've only ever built her. The air around them felt quieter somehow, like even the wind knew not to interrupt. I don't know what we are, Callie whispered. You and me, he nodded. Neither do I. But I know I want you here, she said. Not because I need saving, but because I want you in our story, whatever shape it takes. His thumb brushed across the back of her hand. Then I'm here. And for the first time in years, she let herself believe it. Not just hear it, but feel it. Deep in the parts of her that had learned to expect endings. Tonight didn't feel like an ending. It felt like the beginning of something worth fighting for. The courtroom was smaller than Callie had imagined. Not grand or echoing like in movies, just 4 beige walls, worn wood benches, and the soft hum of the ceiling fan above. The carpet had seen better days, and the judge's bench looked like it had been scratched by 1,000 nervous shoes resting against it over the years. But the air, it was thick, with nerves, with tension, with the weight of everything unspoken. Callie sat at the long table to the left, her lawyer beside her, calm and measured. She couldn't remember what earrings she had put on that morning or whether she'd eaten anything besides the half banana Sophie had insisted they share at breakfast. All she remembered was the weight of her daughter's hug before leaving. Be brave, Sophie had whispered, pressing her small hand to Callie's heart. Right here. Miles sat behind her in the courtroom, not speaking, not shifting. Just there. Solid. The only anchor that didn't drift. Daniel sat on the other side, dressed in a slate blue suit that probably cost more than Callie's car. His lawyer, crisp and confident, handed papers across the table like it was all just a formality. When the judge entered, everyone stood. The proceedings began quietly, with introductions and pleasantries, but every word felt like a clock ticking in Callie's ears. Then came the moment. Ms. Jensen, the judge said, peering over rimmed glasses, you've indicated you're the sole provider and guardian of your daughter, Sophie Jensen. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor. You've raised her without financial assistance from Mr. Carter, correct? And, Mr. Carter, you are now requesting visitation rights based on renewed stability, Daniel stood. Yes, Your Honor. I've taken steps to build a secure home, steady income, and I believe it's in Sophie's best interest to know her father. Callie flinched at the phrase. Know her father, as if that word belonged to him by default. The judge glanced at the documents again. There are no prior criminal charges, no indication of abuse or neglect, but also no consistent attempts to contact the child until very recently. Daniel's lawyer stood. Mr. Carter has acknowledged his past absence, but he has taken full responsibility and shown commitment to building a relationship with his daughter. Callie could feel her lungs tightening. Responsibility without presence. Words without weight. Her lawyer spoke next, citing dates and medical records, enrollment forms every holiday spent together, every sick day endured alone, every birthday cake she'd baked from scratch because no one else would. The judge nodded. I'd like to hear from someone else, he said, surprising everyone. Mr. Whitmore, I understand you've submitted a personal statement in support of Ms. Jensen. Miles stood slowly. Calm? Sure. He approached the bench with quiet respect. Yes, Your Honor. What is your relation to the child? Miles paused. Not for effect, for truth. I'm not her father, he said. Not by blood, not by law. The courtroom was silent. But she calls me her friend. Sometimes her reader, her joke tester, her nightlight checker. The judge tilted his head. And your involvement? I met Callie and Sophie on Christmas Eve, Miles said. I was alone. They knocked on my door with cookies. They didn't know anything about me. They just showed up with kindness. Callie felt tears press behind her eyes. Since then, Miles continued. I've been in Sophie's life nearly every day. Not because I had to, because I wanted to. I've seen the way Callie protects her, teaches her, loves her. She's raised a daughter who is kind, curious, and whole, without help, without complaint. The judge folded his hands. I've had money, Miles said. I've built things, lost things, succeeded in ways people admire. But nothing has meant more to me than being let into that little girl's world. Callie wiped her cheek silently. I'm not here to discredit Mr. Carter, Miles said, but I'm here to defend Sophie's stability, her safety, her joy, because those things are fragile, and they should never be gambled with. He looked directly at the judge now. She already has a home, a family. It may not look traditional on paper, but it's real. There was silence. The judge finally spoke. Thank you, Mr. Whitmore. That was helpful. Miles returned to his seat, brushing past Callie just long enough for their fingers to meet. That touch held everything. When the hearing adjourned for the day, the outcome still pending, Callie stepped outside and leaned against the brick wall, breathing deep. Miles joined her. Didn't say anything. Just waited. She turned, voice breaking. I was terrified you'd walk away from all this. He met her eyes. I don't walk away from the people I love. And that was the first time he said it out loud. Not whispered, not assumed, spoken. Real. Callie didn't say it back. Not yet. But her hand found his again, and she didn't let go. Snow began to fall again the day the judge called them back to court. Not the heavy cinematic kind, but soft flurries that barely landed before vanishing. Callie watched them from the passenger seat of Miles's car, her fingers pressed against her temple as they drove in silence toward the courthouse. Sophie was with her neighbor, oblivious to the decision that could reshape everything she knew. She asked me this morning, Callie said quietly, if people always get to choose who their family is. Miles glanced at her. What did you tell her? I said sometimes we don't get to choose where we come from. But we do get to choose where we go next. Miles gave a small nod. That's true. She folded her hands in her lap. I just didn't realize how much it would hurt to watch someone try to rewrite her story like he was part of it all along. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. When they entered the courthouse, everything felt more compressed, like the air itself had grown thinner. Callie caught a glimpse of Daniel down the hall speaking with his attorney, dressed in the same polished armor he always wore. He didn't look at her. She didn't look long enough to care. Inside the courtroom, the judge wasted no time. No introductions, no pleasantries. I've reviewed the evidence, he said, voice steady. And the court recognizes that Mr. Carter has no history of direct harm to the child. However, it is also clear that there has been a prolonged absence in his involvement with Sophie Jensen's life. Callie felt her throat tighten. The judge continued, It is in the court's interest to protect the child's emotional and psychological stability. Therefore, while I am granting Mr. Carter supervised visitation rights, any potential future custody modifications will require a thorough psychological evaluation and a sustained period of consistent contact. Daniel shifted in his seat, the first crack in his otherwise confident posture. The judge looked toward Callie now. Ms. Jensen, I commend the consistency and commitment you've shown in raising your daughter. The evidence speaks clearly to a nurturing and safe environment. Then his eyes landed on Miles. And Mr. Whitmore, your involvement has added a layer of stability I don't often see in cases like this. I hope that continues. Callie didn't breathe until the gavel tapped the block. It was over. Not forever. But for now, outside the flurries had stopped, leaving a thin veil of white across the sidewalk. Callie and Miles stood beside the car for a moment, not speaking, just breathing in the relief that felt too fragile to name. She turned to him, voice raw. I don't know how to explain what that meant. You don't have to. I thought I'd feel more victorious, she said, eyes distant. But I just feel tired. That's what surviving feels like sometimes. They both looked up at the same time at the sky, the clouds parting ever so slightly. Do you think he'll come back? She asked quietly. Miles was quiet for a beat. Maybe. But now he knows he doesn't get to rewrite the ending. They stood there until her fingers reached for his again. I want you with us, she said, the words slower, more deliberate. Not just as a visitor in this chapter. I want you in the story. The whole story. Miles didn't flinch. He stepped closer, brushing a snowflake from her cheek. I'm not going anywhere, he said. I didn't know what it felt like to be needed by someone real. Not for what I have, but for who I am. She smiled softly. You're not a billionaire to her, you know. I know. To her, I'm just the guy who makes pancakes and sings off-key. Callie laughed, the sound unexpected, almost foreign after the tension of the day. Come on, she said. Let's go home. I think she'll want to build a snow bunny in the yard. Miles opened the car door for her. Only if I get to name it. You can try, she said, sliding into the seat. But she's very particular about bunny names. As they drove back through the small town, the snowflakes started again. Light, playful, unbothered by court decisions or strained pasts. The kind of snow that only came when everything heavy had finally lifted, if only for a little while. Inside the car, warmth built steadily between them, and behind them the courthouse grew smaller in the rearview mirror, just a building now. Not the place where their story changed, but where it began to truly matter. The smell of cinnamon and melted butter filled the kitchen. Sophie sat on the counter with her legs swinging, spooning batter into cupcake tins, while Miles hovered nearby with a dish towel draped over one shoulder. I think these are going to be your best ones yet, he said, eyeing the mess she'd made. Flour dotted the tip of her nose like a snowy kiss. That's because I put extra love in them, she whispered with dramatic flair. Callie leaned against the doorframe watching them. Her chest ached, not in the way it used to from fear or exhaustion, but from something softer. Something that felt like warmth, slowly filling the spaces where loneliness used to live. Sophie caught her eye and grinned. Mom, Miles says if these come out good we can sell them and become millionaires. I said no such thing. Miles laughed. Callie walked over, brushing a smudge of flour off Sophie's cheek. Well, if that's the plan, I hope you both like 3 a.m., wake-up calls and frosting in your hair. Miles pretended to weigh the idea. Is it chocolate frosting? Mostly, Sophie chimed in. Callie smiled, but her heart tugged as she watched them. The last 2 weeks had been steady, a quiet rhythm of snow days, stories, shared dinners. Daniel had not contacted her again. No sudden emails, no letters. It was as if the court decision had taken the fight out of him. But that didn't mean her mind had stopped bracing for impact. Later that evening, with Sophie tucked into bed and the cupcakes cooling on the counter, Callie and Miles sat in the living room. The fire crackled low in the hearth, casting flickering light across their faces. Miles reached for her hand without hesitation now. It felt natural. Earned. Tell me something, Callie said quietly. Anything. Do you miss it? He looked at her, puzzled. Miss what? The old life, the spotlight, the endless meetings, knowing you were needed by half the world. Miles leaned his head back against the couch, exhaling slowly. No, he said, but I miss believing that mattered. She turned toward him, curious. I used to think being irreplaceable at work meant I was important, that my name in headlines meant I was valuable, but I was just busy, surrounded by noise, and lonely anyway. She didn't speak, just let his words sit between them. I didn't know what it meant to be needed, he continued. Not really. Until that kid knocked on my door holding a cookie tin and asked if I had any juice. Callie smiled at the memory. She does have a way of rewriting people's lives. He looked at her then, just like her mom. Her expression shifted, soft, vulnerable. Sometimes I still don't know what I'm doing, she admitted. I wonder if I've made the right calls. If loving Sophie with everything I have is enough. He squeezed her hand gently. It's more than enough. You didn't just raise her, you raised a life with meaning. She knows how to love because of you. Callie's eyes filled, but she didn't look away. You say that like you've been watching. I have, he said. Every day since Christmas. There was a long pause. Comfortable. Then Callie whispered, Do you think we're really allowed to have this? Us after everything? Miles leaned in slightly, his voice steady. I think after everything we've earned it. Her eyes flicked to his. You're sure I've never been more sure of anything in my life? The room fell quiet except for the fire. And then, without hesitation, Callie leaned in close enough that she could smell the faint spice of his cologne, see the soft creases at the corners of his eyes. She kissed him. Slow. Certain. When they pulled apart, she didn't look away. About time, she murmured. He grinned. Was starting to wonder if I'd have to bake another batch of cupcakes just to earn one. You still might. They both laughed soft and low, and it felt like the first time either of them had really let go. That night, snow fell again, light and slow, blanketing the streets in silence. The lighthouse in the distance blinked its steady rhythm. And in a small house on the hill, two people who had spent years waiting for something real finally stopped waiting. They were already in it. The following morning brought the kind of golden light that made everything look softer, gentler, as if the world itself was exhaling. Callie stood in the kitchen pouring coffee, trying to ignore the way her hands trembled just slightly. It wasn't nerves, not exactly. It was the feeling of everything settling into something real, something precious. And with that came the quiet fear that it could still slip away. Miles walked in wearing one of his oldest flannel shirts, faded sleeves, rolled up barefoot, and Callie swore she could get used to the sight of him like this. Present, unpolished, completely hers. He kissed her temple without asking. You didn't sleep much, he said. I was thinking, she admitted. Dangerous habit. She laughed softly. I just keep waiting for the part where the floor drops out again, she said. Where something changes and everything good disappears. He leaned against the counter, coffee in hand. You've been walking alone for so long you forgot what it feels like to be held up. She met his gaze. And what if I fall anyway? Then I'll be right there. A knock at the front door interrupted the quiet. Callie turned, heart-skipping. Are you expecting anyone? Miles shook his head. Yo, sir. She set her cup down and walked slowly to the door. Through the window pane, she saw a woman mid-50s bundled in a pale blue coat, holding something in her hands. Callie opened the door cautiously. Hi, the woman said gently. You must be Callie. Yes, I'm Margaret Carter, she said. Daniel's mother. Callie's breath caught. Oh. Margaret held out a small envelope. I'm sorry to show up like this. I've wanted to meet you for a long time, and I understand if you'd rather I didn't stay. Callie hesitated, then stepped aside. Come in. Miles appeared in the hall, his expression unreadable. Margaret smiled at him with quiet recognition. You must be Miles. I am. She nodded. I've read about you. Some good things, I hope. Only the good. They sat in the living room, the envelope untouched on the coffee table between them. I want to be clear, Margaret began. I didn't come here on Daniel's behalf. In fact, he doesn't know I'm here. We haven't spoken much since the hearing. Callie looked at her cautious but open. Why now? Margaret looked down at her hands. Because I've spent years pretending my son's mistakes weren't mine to carry, that I didn't contribute by turning a blind eye. But watching that courtroom, seeing what you've built, what you've protected, I realized silence isn't neutral. It's a choice. Callie swallowed hard. I wasn't there for you, or for Sophie. And I can't undo that. Margaret continued, her voice cracking. But I can say thank you for giving her a life full of love even when you didn't have support. And I can say I'm sorry. The room was still. I brought this, she added, sliding the envelope forward. Photos. From when Daniel was little, in case Sophie ever wants to know that part of her story. Callie picked it up, her fingers brushing the flap. Thank you. I understand if you're not ready, Margaret said. Or if you never are. I needed you to hear it from someone in his life that what he did wasn't right, and that you were never wrong for protecting her. Callie blinked quickly, pressing her hand to her heart. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. Margaret stood. I won't keep you. Callie walked her to the door. Before leaving, Margaret turned once more. And for what it's worth, Sophie looks like you when she smiles. Callie watched her walk down the porch steps, disappearing into the snowy morning. When she returned to the living room, Miles reached for her hand. You okay? I think so. They opened the envelope together later that night. Sophie sat beside them, quiet, curious, her small fingers flipping through faded Polaroids and birthday snapshots of a boy with Daniel's nose and her own soft eyes. Who's this? She asked, holding up one where Daniel, age 7, held a frog, like it was treasure. That's your biological father, Callie said gently. His name is Daniel. Sophie tilted her head. He looks silly. Miles laughed. He probably was. Sophie looked between them. Is he still trying to come live with us? No, Callie said. But he's part of your story. And if you ever want to know more, we'll figure it out. Together. Sophie nodded, satisfied, and went back to arranging the photos into patterns. Later, after she'd gone to bed, Callie curled into Miles on the couch. You handled that with more grace than I think I could have, he whispered. Callie let out a breath. I didn't do it for Daniel, or even for Margaret. No, I did it for Sophie. So one day when she's older and asking harder questions, she'll know I didn't keep the truth from her. I just made space for the parts of it that wouldn't hurt. Miles kissed her hair, lingering. She's lucky to have you. Callie shook her head. No. We're lucky to have each other. The first snow of December came early that year. Callie stood on the porch, wrapped in a wool sweater, watching the flakes fall quietly across the backyard. Lights twinkled from the eaves, simple ones, soft white, and Sophie's boots were already by the door, dusted with melting snow from her first run into the yard. She'd insisted on checking for reindeer tracks, even though Christmas was still weeks away. Inside, Miles was hanging the last ornament on the tree. The house smelled like pine and vanilla, and the fire cracked just loud enough to drown out the sound of her quiet sigh. It had been a full year since the knock on his door changed everything. Callie stepped inside, brushing snow from her sleeves. "Tree looks perfect," she said. Miles turned to face her, grinning. Sophie picked the spot for the angel. "Very intense negotiations." "I'm not surprised," she said with a smile. "She takes holiday hierarchy very seriously." He walked over and kissed her cheek, slow and familiar. "I was thinking, maybe we do Christmas here this year. Just us." "Instead of at the cabin," he nodded. "This house your home. It's the place everything started. I think it deserves to hold the memory." Callie looked around the room, the stockings on the mantel, Sophie's artwork taped to the side of the fridge, Miles' reading glasses left carelessly on the kitchen counter. This wasn't just her home anymore. It was theirs. "I'd like that," she said. Sophie burst in, then cheeks flushed and hair wild beneath her pom-pom hat. "I didn't see reindeer, but I saw bunny tracks. I think maybe they're having a meeting about Christmas." Callie knelt. "What do bunnies discuss at a Christmas meeting?" Sophie looked serious. "Snowball regulations and cookie quality control." Miles laughed from the couch. "I'd like to apply for a position on the Cookie Council. You need to submit a form," Sophie said, peeling off her gloves. That night, after Sophie was asleep, after the cocoa mugs had been emptied and the fire burned low, Callie found herself sitting on the edge of her bed, holding a small wrapped box. She turned it over in her hands, fingers tracing the ribbon. Miles stood in the doorway. "That for me?" She looked up, surprised. "You weren't supposed to see. I have very good timing." She hesitated, then held the box out to him. "It's not much, but I've been holding on to it for weeks. I guess I was waiting for the right time." He sat beside her, opened the lid slowly. Inside was a photograph, one Sophie had taken with Callie's phone. It was slightly tilted, a little blurry, but captured perfectly, the three of them sitting on a picnic blanket, laughing at something none of them remembered. Beneath it was a slip of paper, handwritten in Callie's soft script. Not perfect. Not planned. Just ours. Miles stared at the photo for a long moment. His throat worked, but no words came. "You once said Callie whispered that you were afraid of missing something good." He nodded, still looking at the photo. "You didn't miss it," she said. "You built it with us." He set the photo down, eyes shining. "Callie." But she held up a hand, smiling through the tremble in her lips. "You don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know this life we have, this little beautiful, messy life. It saved me. Not just from fear, but from the lie I was living. That I wasn't allowed to hope for more." Miles reached into his pocket, pulled out a small box. Callie's heart stopped. "No," he said gently. "This isn't that kind of box. Not yet." She let out a shaky laugh, hand over her mouth. He opened it. Inside was a silver key. Simple. Worn. She stared. "This is to my house," he said. "The one I used to call home before everything changed. It's been sitting empty for months. I didn't know what to do with it, but now I do." She looked at him, confused. "It's for you," he said softly. "Not to move in, not to leave this house, but to know you always have choices, that nothing ties you here except your own heart." Tears spilled silently. "I've had all the wealth in the world," he said, "but none of it meant anything until I earned a place in your story." She reached for his hand, holding it tight. "You've never once made me feel like I had to earn yours," she said. They sat there, hands tangled, the room quiet. The wind tapped softly at the windows. "I don't know what comes next," Callie whispered, "but I want it with you. And with her. I want to keep choosing this over and over." Miles smiled, forehead against hers. "Then that's exactly what we'll do." The next morning, Sophie woke to the smell of cinnamon rolls and the sight of her mom dancing in the kitchen while Miles flipped pancakes. Music played from the old radio, the kind with a dial that never landed quite right. And outside, snow covered the town like a quiet promise. They sat at the table together, laughing over syrup and silly stories, and somewhere between the clink of silverware and the sound of Sophie humming under her breath, Callie realized something she hadn't before. This wasn't the happy ending. This was the beginning of choosing love, of choosing peace, of choosing family, not the one they were given, but the one they built with open hands and braver hearts. And that, she thought, was the most beautiful story of all.